So my wife and I last night were watching something on HBO called Barry with the comedian and actor Bill Hader. And I recognized him, or my wife did at least, from the Saturday Night Live skit where he played a comedian or a club kid, and sort of an eccentric club kid in New York City named Stefan. And he goes to these clubs and he gives reviews, and the reviews are absolutely ridiculous. And he'd be talking about, and what's so funny though, it made me think, wow, his reviews are actually exactly what you might think like an Epstein party might be like, or maybe a Diddy party or one of these crazy things, right? You have models and midgets and 14-year-olds and future presidents, and it was just insane. And when life becomes like a parody, it becomes, too weird, especially when you're talking about the presidency. And sort of that all got me to thinking about this idea of, that this Epstein issue is really going to actually have a very negative effect on UFOs. And people I don't know if they're connecting it or not, but certainly it's something that has occurred to me. Now, to be fair, I'm not, I never was really interested in the Epstein issue until maybe late last year, October-ish or something like that. And I knew very general things about Epstein. I wasn't watching videos. I wasn't reading books or articles. I just knew that he was a bad guy. He was a sex offender, a registered sex offender, I think as of 2008. I knew that he was like pretty, in a lot of circles. He had this island somewhere in the Virgin Islands where he would go. But in general, I really didn't know that, there was 1,200 alleged victims, that, so many prominent people were there repeatedly to his island, including, or on his airplane at least, including Donald Trump. I knew that there were pictures and videos of Trump, and they seemed to be very, close friends, or at least really, really pretty tight. There's a gross scene where they're kind of like where Trump's seen dancing as he does and pointing at, obviously, young girls who are posing. It's really creepy. And then there's another thing I remember seeing, you can't forget, where Trump gives him a toast, and at the end of the toast, and he says, and he's known to like the women, especially the young women, and it's just so disgusting, right? Well, now I've learned a lot more, and obviously, in my opinion, there's just no question that Donald Trump was absolutely well aware of who Epstein was, even if he didn't participate in any of the debauchery, which, there's a lot of good questions of whether he did or not. He was convicted, or not convicted, but he's found liable of civil rape. So it doesn't, not of an adult. But when you have that kind of thing against you, it makes me think you could have been a participant. But even if it turns out there's no evidence that he was a participant, that he, did anything to an underage woman, the reality is, though, he was absolutely aware that Epstein was a predator, right? He was an absolute predator, and certainly had pedophile tendencies throughout that time. He had to have known. And so for me, that disqualifies Trump as president. Now, how does this tie into the issue of morality and then sort of the political ramifications therefrom? So, well, first of all, when it comes to morality, I have to say I find it entirely absurd when I see, Representative Burleson, going to the mummies in Mexico, or going to the Virginia thing in wherever it was, New York City, and saying he's taking things on and he's going to pass this legislation and subpoena people, or whatever he says. And it's like, okay, that's cool, but what have you said publicly against President Trump for his proximity and socialization and continued relationship for a long period of time, at a time when he absolutely knew, that Epstein was a disgusting creep. And for that matter, Trump is a disgusting creep. And how do you reconcile that with Eric Burleson and all these Republicans who are always saying how Christian they are? it is so utterly disgusting, frankly, and hypocritical and cowardly. It's just gross. And so I don't hear their public denunciation of Trump. Where is that denunciation? Where is that saying, no, this is unacceptable? And where the hell are the rest of the Epstein files for that matter? Nothing. And of course, Luna, nothing. 0 words, just her pictured, taking photos with sociopathic Russian diplomats who work for Putin, taking photos with Trump, and constantly yapping about something and complaining and saying she's angry at somebody and going to threaten somebody. And she has, it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And so to me, the UFO community has invested themselves with these very right-wing, and again, they're, I'm not going to call them Nazis, but they're certainly MAGA right-wing Republicans who lack the courage and the principle, all the while claiming they're great Christians, which is just, again, entirely laughable. And they've aligned themselves with Trump. And they refuse to really condemn and come forward and say this is unacceptable, regardless. I mean, now it's time to get rid of Trump. It's been time for a while. He's also not really there. He appears to be having the same kind of mental issues as Biden. Maybe not quite there yet, but it's coming. He's not getting any younger. So we have a real issue, right? A real issue going on with the issue of morality. Now, the consequence of this is ultimately going to be the Republicans are going to be wiped out in November of this year. And then the following 2 years will be entirely with the Democrats roadblocking them. They're going to be off a lot of committees. They're going to lose power, and they're going to be roadblocked as a in government. And we're going to have stalemate for a while, or a lot of dysfunction, a lot of conflict. And certainly things like all the things going on with ICE and Greenland and, Trump, it's all going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And by aligning themselves, and frankly, that's because a lot of the people in the sort of leadership, the UFO community, not all, but several of the more prominent people are MAGA. Not all, that's for darn sure, but some are. And so even those, frankly, there's many liberals who are podcasters or who are part of the sort of concentric circles of ufology, and even they have well aligned themselves with Trump. They'd always, they'd say, oh, but forget the fact that Trump is a Nazi or a terrible person, all that. What's he going to do for the UFOs? Is he going to give us disclosure? Like, there's such a transactional point of view, that as long as as long as Trump leads us to disclosure, it doesn't matter that he threatens our allies, abandons Ukraine, abandons Europe, threatens Canada. I mean, absurdities, the immigration issue. It's just whether you're a liberal or a MAGA right person. Obviously, they have more alignment, but there's no morality to this, And so what you can see happening very clearly because of the Epstein, principally because of the Epstein thing, because all of the rest of it, I think a lot of Republicans will just forgive him because they don't care about Greenland, they don't care about Europe, they don't, they're happy for tariffs, or at least they don't think about the implications of that to the economic world order. They just want what they want. But Epstein is the one thing that's really aggravated a lot of Republicans, including people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, to her credit, have made this a big issue for herself, Thomas Massie, and some others. And so there's going to be literally a 1,000-foot tidal wave, not just your normal tidal wave, like a huge tidal wave that's going to have devastating and long-lasting effects upon the Republican Party because of its, allowing MAGA to take over and Trump to be a crazy person. Well, what does this mean for UFOs? Well, it means that all of the UFO people who are aligned with Republicans and Trump are going to get wiped out. That is to say, you're not going to have anybody to talk to because they won't be there. Or if they're there, they're going to be off the committee chairs. They're going to be just in the background making some noise, but they're not going to survive this over the long term, right, in terms of their political position. And I think people who are going to, looking back, if you find that those people were aligned or transactional, if they were a liberal who were like, well, I supported Trump because of the UFOs, you're going to have no credibility. In fact, to me, you already don't. So this whole issue of Epstein, right, and the utter immorality of that is just going to wipe everything out. And it's a huge setback, I think, at least for a period of time, for this concept of disclosure, right? Now, there are some people who say, well, I'm not willing to throw out Trump until we have more evidence. It's like, come on. This is ridiculous. This is one of the dumbest things I've heard. Look, if you knew a 45, 50-year-old guy, because, Trump said he knew him for about 15 years, I think up until 2008. I don't know. I think he's known him longer than that. But in any event, throughout the 90s and, early aughts, he's a friend. Well, he knew who he was. Like, if you Think about if you know if you have a friend of yours, a male who's 45, 50 years old, somewhere in that age range, maybe a little older, and you found out even today that they were going to parties and there were a lot of girls there who appeared to be even under 18 or around that age, and they were around a lot of older, mostly men, and there didn't seem to be a lot of reason for them being there. I mean, they weren't, they weren't invited guests. They were just sort of there. They weren't. They're not Bill Gates or family members. They're unknown women, right? And what they were trafficked women, trafficked young girls, and you would know this. I mean, just imagine if somebody came back to you and said, I just went to that party, great guy, this Jeff guy. I'm going to go to a couple more of his parties. The last few have been awesome. Every time we go, it's super fun. A lot of girls there, a lot of 14-year-olds, a lot of models, midgets, 14-year-olds. I mean, you would just be like, what are you doing going to this party, right? Like, I mean, it sounds weird. Like, what's up with this party? Is this a Diddy freak off or something like that? Like, what the hell is happening here? And who is this guy, Jeffrey Epstein? And isn't he married, or why does he have all these girls? They can't be members of his family. Like, what is going on? You would know 1,000% that there was something terribly wrong. And you would say, you need to stop going to those things. This guy seems like a freak. Okay, something's wrong with this guy. Something's mentally wrong. Something's maybe criminally wrong. You just don't know. But you would have an absolute intuition that something was off. Now, granted, if you just saw him once, or you met him one place here and then one place there, and he happened to just be in proximity, those things happen in any kind of life, right? If you're part of you're part of the medical community, you might run into a doctor a few times in a few places, you get photographed with them, but you don't really know them. You're just, there. Okay, maybe, right? Same could happen. You're in a small town, whatever. But this is different. Donald Trump was absolutely friends with him. Epstein commented on his love of younger women. I mean, we know for a fact that Donald Trump is a bad person. Sexually assaulted women, has many complaints, it's just everything about him suggests that, and you choose to ignore it. Why? Because of the UFOs. And this is the immorality of the UFO community, particularly many of the podcasters. They will do anything for UFOs, anything to, they will never take a stand. They will always be looking to curry favor with anybody who would give them some insight, give them a little headline so they could get more clicks or likes on their YouTube channel. And you're gonna get the payback on that, right? You're gonna learn. It's all gonna get wiped out. And all the progress that you think is going to be made is going to go away. I predict even if there were a fantastic whistleblower with better credentials than anybody has come so far, none of that's going to matter. Epstein's going to wipe it out, because that's where the intention and the mindset and everything else is going to go. Even if you can forget, Trump and January 6th. I mean, to me, it's just impossible to imagine a president of the United States being a person who was friends with and knowingly friends for a long period of time with a guy who is a sex trafficker, and now we know one who may have had up to 1,200 victims. I mean, that's an astounding number of victims. So look, spare me and spare me the UFO people, especially all these podcasters, like, it's immoral that we don't get disclosure. It's immoral that I'm not talked about. You have no morality. You're willing to trade anything, young children, girls, your own ethics, your own beliefs, for UFOs. What is wrong with you, right? What is wrong with you? What is of your essence? What is the point of the UFOs? Are they going to come here and make us moral again? I don't think so. Nothing indicates that. Is free energy, a lower utility bill, something you would trade your principles for? Apparently, yes. That's the truth of it. And that's the hidden truth that I've kept to myself for a lot of the time. Many of the people in ufology have significant moral problems, okay? And I'm not talking about my clients. I love my clients. I may disagree with them on some things, but I try not to represent people who I think, who I know have a real issue, that I would have a real issue with. But I am telling you, in my engagements, conversations, things I've heard within many of the, glittery people. I call them the glitterati. I don't know a better word for them, but the people who you think are like, oh, they're great. They're not so great, and they often act very unethically, or at least in my opinion, immorally, right? Or both. So yeah, this is going to come, this is going to hit home. You better step out of the way, refine, your principles, decide what is moral, decide who you are and what you stand for. And that is far more important than whether there are aliens floating around or visiting nuclear weapons facilities or, accosting people at night and returning them. Like, all that, fine, but we got to really focus on the key problem. And the key problem is we have right-wing Republicans who are MAGA Republicans. It's not unfair to call them right-wing because they're not even really right-wing. They're not really, in my mind, Republicans. They're a very sort of unique subset of about 50-60% of the Republican Party who are sort of nativist lunatics, akin to the people who didn't want to get involved in World War II or World War I, wanted to turn a blind eye to Hitler, and just wanted to focus on their own sort of greed. That was their principal motivation. What made them feel full, okay? And that's who MAGA is. They're lunatics. Fortunately, at least some of them have a spine and still care about some things. And I guess predation upon young boys, women, men is what does it. Well, thank God for that at least. Okay, so again, my thing is that this immorality within the UFO community and this transactional, very selfish behavior is not going to serve you well if you want to get to disclosure. Now, whether we even deserve disclosure is another topic altogether, given the fact of how immoral we are and how unprincipled and how cowardly so many people are. And so I'm actually here to say, I've kept my peace in many respects, out of deference and caution and all the usual things, but not really, no longer. I'm not holding back. I'm going to come out and say the truths that may hurt people's feelings. And one of them right now is this: if you fail to condemn Trump for and repeatedly and vocally and publicly, and to de-affiliate with him. If you are like a Burleson who is just, a weak weed, like I see him, he just bends to whatever. As long as it's, he'll go to magazine, whatever he can do, except taking principled stands that actually require to have a backbone. If you're like Luna, who's really just completely unhinged, doesn't know what she's doing, I can tell you that in more detail later. She has no idea what she's doing. And she's out there, condemning everybody while she takes pictures with people who committed war crimes. I mean, meaning the Russians. And then she's, friends with Trump, or supposedly so, or loves to take a picture next to him. Not forgetting the fact that he tried to, he tried January 6th. It was sedition. And now all this stuff with Epstein, but she doesn't care. It makes no difference to her what a terrible human he was, whether he was next to or friends with a sex trafficker and pedophile. No, nothing. She says nothing about that. This is who you've chosen to be part of your UFO community of idols, right? And everybody tries to get next to them and curry favor with them. It is gross. It's disgusting. And it's cowardly. And I don't respect it. This is what's going to happen. You're not going to get to your disclosure through the Republicans and through MAGA. You got to abandon that ship. You got to choose better people. You got to demand some morality. And that's the first steps to getting to maybe where you want with respect to UFOs. All right, that's my point of view. Agree with it or not, it is what I think.